This gets me, and I want to get into the start of give you a little taste of what I wrote on Substack this week, because it's sort of a reaction to what he decided to do in D.C. and the sort of the different ways that, we talked about it. I think I quoted my friend Andrew Sullivan earlier about how, hey, this is a permanent stain, that all the efforts, during Trump 1.0, there were real efforts to push back on him. And in Trump 2.0, we haven't seen any. And the question is this the right call or the wrong call? And in Trump 1.0, was resisting the right call or the wrong call? So let me sort of take you back a little bit. Look, I do believe this. The greatest political skill Donald Trump has isn't the ability to rally his base. His great skill is that he can bully everyone around him into believing there are no rules, only winners and losers. And I believe if you accept that premise, the way he views the world, you've already surrendered to him. Hear me out. And I think in this second term so far too many folks have sort of accepted the premise of winners and losers. As I've complained to you a couple days ago, we're not seeing as anybody use the tools that the founders gave everybody to push back on somebody who was abusing the tyranny of the majority, if you will, right? It's total silence there. It's fascinating to me why we had resistance in 1.0, and I think I have an idea of why we don't have it in 2.0. Because in 1.0, Trump did run into resistance, and it was everywhere. He ran into resistance in his own cabinet at times, who would say no. He ran into resistance among congressional Republicans who occasionally pushed back and pushed back hard. Corporate leaders were willing to take a stand, or certainly didn't want to be seen with him and decided not to be part of the spectacle. Totally different in Trump 2.0, right? That's gone completely. Constitution hasn't changed, by the way. But this time the people sworn to uphold it have decided it's a lot easier, or that they think it's in their own best interest to stay quiet. So the new playbook is clearly appeasement of Trump. And the question is appeasement working or not? Give him something small and hope he moves on, right? Give him a little gold-plated award, right? Tim Cook, or paint over the Black Lives Matter plaza, right? Muriel Bowser, and hope it placates him. Okay, there you go, Mr. Trump. All right, are you happy now? Are you? But I think we know, and you've heard me say this before, if you give a mouse a cookie, they're going to keep coming back for more cookies. And Trump is never satisfied. He is always hungry for more cookie. Question is, why is the pushback gone? I think Republican lawmakers fear the base, fear primary, and fear personal retribution. It's not manufactured, it's real. Talk to any of the former Republicans who did push back on him, what life is like when you confront Donald Trump in your own party, and what members of MAGA do. Look, I've been on the bruising end of the MAGA world, coming after me when he's put me in, painted a target on my back. And so I can only imagine it's 10 times worse if, who's the greatest anger at, right? Whenever you have political movements, it's the idea of a traitor, right? You get angrier at somebody who's a turncoat than you do as your actual opponent. And I do think that that's what many Republicans have faced. And corporate America. Well, corporate America looks at this tariff regime that he's trying to implement, and they're scared. They're scared to death of it. They're scared to death he'll weaponize regulatory and all this stuff. So, and they feel like if they push back, he will simply, because he's so weaponized, all criticism is partisan as far as he's concerned, and all Republicans have unified around that premise. And so it really has chilled sort of what I would say are independent actors like corporate CEOs who don't want to be accused of picking a side and think if they criticize Trump, they're picking a side. But if they acquiesce to Trump, they think they're not. Anyway, media organizations, right? They fear access. They fear the regulatory. They fear the being branded as a partisan, that somehow if that will hurt their ratings, hurt their credibility. Not being straightforward, truthful, and hard-hitting is what's going to hurt your credibility, but still. And then even the courts, right? The courts were much more aggressive at pushing back with Trump and Trump 1.0. Now you've got, led by John Roberts, there's this, a lot of the judiciary is nervous that Trump may just simply ignore court rulings. And so it's almost like because of that fear, he's gotten more court rulings that have been modestly favorable, right? They find a way to give him a little something so that he accepts the ruling that maybe pushes back on another entity of that. So I think that's when, I think it turned out, right? Democrats have not been very good at pushing back, and part of the reason is they're now isolated, right? It was Democrats felt easier pushing back on Trump 1.0 because there were Republican voices pushing back on, so it didn't feel like a partisan exercise. It felt like a patriotic exercise. It was real cover. And I think the Republicans speaking out against Trump stiffened the spine of the Democrats. But now what remains of the Republican Party, they act as one. They're a sole defense mechanism of all things Trump. I mean, look at the silence into the Trump trial balloon of basically getting rid of the jobs data, right? This is sort of the mark of an authoritarian. And it's like, this is just a catastrophic idea of just screwing up government data and trust again. And look, they're not in town, so there's not a lot of reporters harassing them for responses, but there's no Republicans voluntarily going to push back. They will just give you blind quotes to reporters saying that this is troubling. And then you've got Democrats split on how to resist Trump, right? One camp wants to continue to stand on principle and make a constitutional case against Trump. The other says that's naive. You got to fight Trump on his terms, which of course is where I'm a little skeptical. I think the minute you accept the premise that Trump can dictate the terms of the fight, you've already lost the larger war, right? You may win a battle here and there, but you're going to lose the larger war, and you're going to lose your own credibility there. I think if you adopt your opponent's disregard for the rules, you have to ask yourself, what are you defending, right? What are you defending? What constitutional principles are you standing up for? But the greatest trick that Trump has pulled off is he's convinced much of the country that any criticism of him is partisanship. So what does that do? It makes it harder for Republicans to feel comfortable speaking out because they don't want to be accused of helping Democrats. CEOs won't speak out because they don't want to be labeled woke. Newsrooms soften their coverage as an attempt to try to keep their access with the Trump administration. And collectively, it isolates it into a partisan back and forth, that somehow constitutional principles are a partisan, are somehow you're a partisan actor, if you will. And so just trying to hold him accountable is being reframed as bias, right? And that's how many people consume, no matter how much, look, I always say this, I tell my conservative and liberal friends, just because somebody's not a conservative doesn't make them a liberal. And just because somebody's not a liberal, it doesn't make them a conservative. But in the world of Trump, everything is binary. And it's why I think I'm skeptical, right? You give him a cookie, give the mouse a cookie, he's going to come back, right? Is Tim Cook done dealing with Trump? I mean, how many times is he going to placate Trump in order to avoid tariff problems, right? He tried it the first time with an announcement of an investment. Then he gave him another chance to announce an investment in the United States. Muriel Bowser tried to placate him, and even now, look, she's in a more difficult position than most in pushing back because he has legal authority to do what he's doing. And she it's not like she can't accept the premise that she could use more resources. She could use more resources. I think she'd like them differently, but she could use more resources. So I do empathize with the situation she's in, and think it's and you have to, and I think she's managing it fairly well. We'll see how the next couple of weeks go. But I will tell you this, if you want one fallout from this, if you're the Republican candidate for governor in Virginia, Winsome Earl Sears, you couldn't be more upset with the White House right now. Because ultimately the DC story is not really is not going to have much impact nationally on voters, okay, whatsoever. But do you know who is paying attention? Northern Virginia. And, he's already got angry federal workers fired up to show up to the polls in November. Now you've got more sort of, and again, as I pointed out yesterday, if you've lived in DC, in the DMV, for more than 20 years, You don't you do all you know is improved DC, right? The long-term trajectory has been better. There is some recent dips, but they are nowhere near the floor of what DC was like in the late 80s and early 90s. And so it is a picture that feels dystopian to many of us, longtime residents of the DMV. And that in itself does not help Winsome Earl Sears in this case either. And look, I think being an African American woman, yes, she's a Republican. I think she's was hoping to make some inroads in a significant African American vote in Virginia, but Trump's actions targeting, a majority African American city in D.C. with an African American mayor is no way to help Republicans win African American voters. So I will say this: a sort of whatever remote chance Republicans may or may not have thought they had in Virginia, Donald Trump's actions are only making that worse, because even if he loses interest in this, you're going to see troops walking around DC, which is such an uncomfortable sight. I mean, the irony is he has them walking around the areas that are always safe, like the mall, right? Like that is not, and to me, it proves that this is all performative, right? If you see a National Guardsman walking around the mall, that's him wanting to see. They want to see, the tour. He wants to make sure tourists see that this is the case. If you actually cared and were worried about the safety of the city, you would be surging these folks in other parts of the city, not walking around the Smithsonian's. So I think it's pretty clear this is a performative act for his base and not really a serious act to get things done. But look, I just this inability to push back against the question is whether was the 1.0 the way to do it, or is it appease and just survive the term and move on? And I think people don't fully appreciate that the collective pushback, the courts, Republicans, independents, business leaders, the press, collectively, I think that the country was convinced, this is not the direction that this is not the type of leadership that is good for the long-term image of the United States, which is why Biden won. But Biden's presidency didn't turn the page, right? As I've said to you before, he wasn't a good enough leader, because a better leader helps the country turn the page. We rarely go backwards as a country. So how bad of a presidency do you have to encourage the country to go backwards? And the perception of of the Biden presidency, it was just a weak and ineffective presidency. It's possible some of the things he signed into law will have long-term success, but the fact of the matter is his legacy is Donald Trump came back, and that's on Joe Biden. But a lot of people have decided they've got to deal with Trump differently, thinking that they're going to get a better outcome, thinking that things are going to get better. And I think that the fact of the matter is that is not how he rolls, and it never will be how he rolls. So I get where we're going, but I will tell you this. The Constitution has all the tools in the world, as I brought up, to support pushing back in terms that are not partisan. This is about whether we want to stay a constitutional republic, where we want these checks and balances, where we don't want an executive branch that tramples over the other two branches of government, where we don't want a 51% majority that tramples over a 49% minority. And yet, I think there are way too many entities, whether it's Democrats who are deciding to fight fire with fire, corporate leaders who decide to placate, thinking that they're better off doing pay for play, and maybe that's better for their short-term shareholder price, but it is bad for the republic. And what is the presidential race at 20 going to look like? Are we really going to have a Democratic nominee that runs and wants less power? It's what we need to have, that both candidates for president, if you want to sort of Trump-proof the presidency in the future, you got to actually have a president who's willing and who asks Congress essentially to take back powers that the founders thought belonged to the legislative branch. The problem is When was the last time you found somebody ran for president wanting less power, Democrat or Republican? So that's what you wonder. And if everybody embraces Trump's vision of winner take all, um, it couldn't be more antithetical to what the founders wanted. The whole point of the founders' vision was a republic where no one could win everything. And now I feel like all parts of our small d democratic society are accepting the premise that there is no middle ground. There is no compromise. You're winning or you're losing. And I worry that we've already lost.